All right, so we are looking at the Irving quadrangle map. This is one of the ones that hopefully you've already downloaded. While we're actually doing this, if you haven't downloaded the other two, the ones called Pingree Park and Big Narrows, please feel free to do that. They are kind of big files, so they need time. But for now, we're just going to focus on how to read these maps in general. And then in the guided practice part, we'll actually use this one to go through some more detailed questions and answers and things like that. So, all right, so let's just walk through how to read this map. What is it showing you? First of all, obviously there are roads on here. They are labeled. The smaller streets are not. Can you imagine what it would look like if we had words labeling every single street on here? It would get very fuzzy looking and difficult to read. So they mostly leave them off. There are a few bigger streets that are labeled though. One of our favorites, there it is, MacArthur Boulevard right there. Um, and there are some bigger buildings that are shown as black shapes on here. They're big buildings. If they showed every building, again, it would look very cluttered, to say the least. We have lakes and rivers slash streams. They are called forks in some cases. They're on here. And then the pinkish shading that you see is the kind of developed urban, suburban type areas that are really filled in with houses and streets and buildings and things. The areas that are either white or green are actually less developed. So you'll notice not much going on there, but there are some things there that we will look at as we go through our practice. Something to take note of if you start zooming in. What is that? We have, and I can actually write on this, so we have actually some contour lines in here. These little brown lines are actually contour lines, and you'll see some bold-faced ones. We talked about those. Those are index contours. And then we have the lighter brown ones, which are just the regular contour lines. Um, and we actually have another one. These are kind of right here is one. These are dotted lines. These are actually contour lines as well, but they mean something specific because this, to be honest, as we'll get into with Irving, there isn't much elevation change. So sometimes they have to draw contours every 5 feet, which is ridiculous. Take a look at this one right here. We have a contour line with some teeth on it. Remember, those are called hasher marks, and those are what we use to show a dip or a depression in the land. So there's kind of a, looks like a ditch there basically. What else is in this exact shot right here? I saw a benchmark somewhere. There it is right here. So if you remember, a benchmark is a specific elevation that they actually show on the map, but also there's a thing there. If you actually drive to this location and look on the road or off to the side of the road, it looks like you'll actually see a marker in the ground or attached to a tree or a building or something there. So that's the kind of the general idea. The other, for this particular map, you're obviously looking at more than just Irving, but also not all of Irving. It's kind of strange the way they mark out where these maps get drawn. So Grand Prairie is on here, and Dallas is also partly on here. So you'll see parts of all of those lovely locations. And just kind of drawing your attention down to the bottom, where are we in the world? Well, down here, here's a map, a cute little map of Texas, and there's a little square there, that little black square dot thing is actually what this map is. So if you can imagine, even as big as this map is, it's not very big when you compare it to all of Texas and the rest of the world. So these are big maps, but not so big maps, but they're very zoomed in. So we're going to talk about that. Over here is your key. That shows you kind of what kinds of roads you're looking at and so on. This is made in or revised in 1995. So if you are looking for, some of these major apartment complexes and other fancy restaurants and things like that we all know and love around Las Colinas right now, they are not here on this map whatsoever. So you might notice a few things that you're familiar with are actually missing. That's just because it's a little older, and I did that on purpose because the new one is it gets even more complicated. So I don't want to get into that now. Let's see. We've got there's a lot of information here, but generally, right there is supposed to be a super fancy compass rose. So if I do this, there's north, west, east, and south. So that's your compass rose. It really doesn't specifically say that, but as with most maps, up is north and left is west, down is south, right is east, that kind of thing. Most importantly on these maps, in the middle is a scale. So right here, the general scale of the whole map is that, which means if you were to use your fingers and measure an inch on this map, and that would mean you have to have it printed out. We'll talk a little bit more about that soon. If you actually print this out, it's about the size of an entire desk, like a student desk. So they're actually very big maps when they're fully printed. But if you were to mark off, and I can estimate because I know these things, how big they are when they're printed, this is about an inch right there. So what I want you to understand is that this is 20, if that's an inch, if you're measuring it on the map, that's 24,000 inches in the real Earth. So that's kind of a bizarre way to think about what a scale is, but that's how zoomed in we truly are with this map. So that's an important fact. The scales that are printed actually below there are important also, and they're useful in some of the things that we do when we're trying to read these maps. You have kilometers, meters, miles, feet, and you pick and choose whichever one you want to use. But since we're stuck in America here, we tend to use the more difficult ones, which are the miles and the feet. Notice the scale is actually 2 miles wide. So literally the reason for that, 0 is in the middle, which is strange. That's just the way they make them. So there's a 0 in the middle, and then all of this is a mile, and so is this. So there are 2 miles. Why do they do this? I'm not sure, but on the left side, they actually mark off the mile and break it up for you. So right here is about half a mile. So there's 0.5 miles, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, 1.0. So that's helpful because you can get some pretty detailed measurements of miles, or feet in that case, if you use the scale. And you remember we used flat, straight edges pieces of paper to use scales and figure out distances. We can do that with these maps as well. If you have a fancy digital thing like I do, I can actually add a little sticky thing here with a grid on it, and it gets way too big, but I'm going to make that smaller, and we're going to make that really small, and I'm going to bring it over, and I'm going to make it a mile wide. Watch this. All right, zoom it in just a little bit. Let's make sure we're about a mile wide, right? So take a look at that. Now, if I hold that there as a mile, if I bring that up into the map and I put it along, say, whatever road I am interested in there, it moved around on me. If I take that and move it along, say, this road, which is I-30, and I can rotate a little bit if I want, see that? So that's about a mile of I-30 right there. So that's how you would use if you had this printed out, you'd use a piece of paper and actually measure things that way. All right, so that is how the scales work. Just real quick, I'll talk about the feet scale. Notice that 0 feet is way over here, not consistent with the other two. And they mark it off by thousands. So there you see going all the way up to 1,000 feet. But over on the left side, they break out, that's supposed to be 10,000, sorry, 10,000 feet. So over here, though, they break up 1,000. So here's 0 where the blue line is, and here's the other blue. That's 1,000. Each of these is 200, 200, 400, 600, 800, 1,000. So again, you can use these scales to get some pretty precise estimates of distance in the real world. So that's kind of the big picture. There's one more critical piece of information on this that you must always look for. And like we said back in the notes a week ago, a couple weeks ago maybe, is that the contour interval is usually given to us. And on this map, it's 10 feet. So if I go into the map and I find a place where I can actually find some contour lines, let's pick this neighborhood right here. And I'm going to put a box there. There's 450, nice and labeled. That means that this guy right here, that would be, well, you guess, is it 460 or is it 440? Because, you know, we're saying the contour interval is you go up and down, up or down by tens. So you have to kind of figure it out. But if you were to, you know, we'll look at this in more detail in a minute, but if you consider there's a lake there, I would bet that this is going down in elevation because water tends to go down, right? So it's probably 440 there, and then this is 460, and this is 470, 480, and so on. So you have to be kind of alert in your observations when you're trying to figure out elevations, but the contour interval tells you what you're going to be going up or down by for each of these lines. And while we're on the topic, you can see some areas, let's see, maybe over here, sometimes these lines, and I can barely zoom in that much, get very, very close together. So I want you to think about what that means, and we'll talk a little more about that too. But it's important to know that the contour interval is 10 feet when you're trying to figure those values out or figure out what's going on in that map. Actually, here's a good area down here where the contour lines are pretty close together. So you have to be really careful and figure out what's actually going on there and count carefully by tens. That's what that contour interval means. So that is this map. I'm going to switch over to a different one really quick. And we'll be using this one too. This is a totally different map. Not Irving. We have gone very far away from Irving. I just want to show you, and this is one of the ones I included that you should download. This is the Pingree Park map. In case I didn't show you, I think I missed it. It's always labeled somewhere, usually in the lower right corner, and it tells you which one you're looking at. And once again, I want you to just notice the consistency here. It shows the little picture of the state and where we actually are, so that's great. The scale is identical on all of these maps. What is not identical, depending on the area you're looking at, is the contour interval. This map, we're talking the Colorado area. This is the Rocky Mountains and things, so the elevations are nuts here. The mountains are very tall and they're very steep. So to use 10-foot contour intervals in a place like this, you'd have even more lines than you see on this map already, which is hard to believe. So everything else though is pretty much the same. So I just wanted to show you that. On these maps though, Texas is a little unique that does not have these. Many other states, most other states have this, you can see a grid system on here. So they're red lines. So I'm going to use my red pen to kind of go over some of those lines. And they're almost perfect squares most of the time. So if you look, I'm just redrawing some of those. This is an old coordinate system. It's very similar to the latitude and the longitude that we talked about. And I'm not going to teach you the details of it, but they're very helpful for this reason. In the middle of each square is a number, and we call that section number. So right now I'm showing you section 3 in this map. Now, there are multiple section 3s. If I look around, I can probably find another one. Oh, right about, there's that one. Let's see here. Scrolling down there, maybe there isn't another section 3. I got lucky and picked one that there isn't a duplicate of, but I can tell you there's probably another 36 somewhere. Maybe way up top, yeah. So here's a 36 there and a 36 there. So sometimes there are multiple sections and I don't want you to get confused. So I'm going to try and provide you guidance on where you're supposed to be looking when I'm asking you questions about these things. So if I said section 36, I would say section 36 in the upper right. So that would direct you towards that one rather than the other one in the lower right or lower or somewhere else. So that's just kind of a general idea. What I didn't mention, I don't think on the other one, there are a lot of numbers on these maps all around. The ones that, a lot of these are more detailed than we care to be or need to know for our class. So the ones I do care about are the ones in the corners, because these go back to, if you look, there's degrees and minutes there. And these little guys actually are seconds. We talked about how a degree of latitude is huge. It's about 70 miles. So and longitude too, we divide them up into minutes and seconds, but here it gives you where you are on Earth. So this one, the line that goes across here is the 40-degree, 37-minute line. And then this line that goes along this edge of the map, all that, you'll notice that number repeats. If I go all the way to the bottom, it's there again, 105.30. So that's our longitude line, 105.30 and 105.30. If you go across the map, the 40-minute, 37-second, or 37-minute, did I say that wrong? Yes. 40-degree, 37-minute, 30-second line. If I go all the way across, you'll see that one repeats over here. So that one's talking about this line that goes all the way across. So that's important because, you know, all these maps tie still into latitude and longitude that we talked about in the last video. So that's a general overview of the maps. They're very consistent with the exception of the contour interval and obviously the elevation. This, if you look at some of these numbers on these maps, we're talking 9,000, 10,000 feet above sea level, whereas in Irving, it's only 300 or 400 or 500 sometimes at the most. So that's why we have different contour intervals. So that'll wrap up this video, and the next one will actually go into more specific questions on how to interpret these maps.